Okay, we shall start this video with the three questions I should have asked you at the end of the last one after finishing the explanation of the poem. Number one, what does Wordsworth see as he is rowing down the river? Lake, river. Number two, what effect does it have on him? And number three, how has it changed him as a person? How has this experience that he described changed him as a person, in your own words? Okay, you write those down, send them in to me. Right, this is the exam summary. So there's four things you have to write about in the exam: ideas, language, structure and context. So we will go through 2 points for each one. Right, firstly the ideas. Oh, I can see a typo there, 2 twos. So the ideas are, what is the subject of the poem? What is Wordsworth trying to say? So the subject is obviously nature and his experience of nature, but what is he trying to say about nature? So he's saying two very closely linked things. He is saying, he's exploring the relationship between nature and man. At the start of the poem, man, Wordsworth, is in harmony with nature, almost in control of nature. The version of nature we get at the start of the poem is peaceful, pastoral, remember that word, and harmless, or you could say benign, which means it won't hurt. So, and it's something that he's able to control. He takes the boat, he rows down the river, so he's very much in control of it. Then obviously this mountain appears, and all of a sudden he is no longer in control. He's scared, he's intimidated, it gets into his mind, he can't get it out of his mind, and by the end of the poem it's fundamentally changed him as a poem. So we are in no doubt by the end of the poem that if nature is in conflict with man, then undoubtedly it is nature that is more powerful than man. So this is similar to Ozymandias, isn't it? When Ozymandias builds that statue, but in the end, nature and time destroys the statue, which represents man's power. And just as here, taking the boat and rowing down the river, he appears to be controlling nature. Then no, by the end of the poem, nature has completely dominated him and is more powerful than anything that his mind is capable of. And very closely linked is the the transformative power of nature. So much like Blake's theory of the sublime, nature has the power to transform human nature. So nature can change fundamentally what we are like as human beings. In this poem, he starts off as a young, naive young man with an idealized view of nature. By the end of the poem, he is disturbed. He is much less optimistic. He is troubled, and certainly nowhere near as innocent as he was at the start of the poem. And it's nature that has brought about that transformation in his personality. Okay, over to language. Just two features here. There's plenty more, but we'll look at those in revision. Nature is personified here, and in particular, the mountain is personified as if it is a human that is pursuing and working its way into Wordsworth's mind. At the start of the poem, nature is personified and the boat is personified, but they are both under the control of Wordsworth at the start of the poem. But around about halfway in the poem, when the mountain is personified, then it is to show its control over Wordsworth, and it is personified as a pretty intimidating, dark and bleak object. And then there is a contrast in the imagery, very similar to personification. Remember, imagery means words and phrases that create a picture. And there's a fairly simple contrast here. At the start of the poem, there is a peaceful, calm, serene, pastoral version of nature. The water is still. He is able to take the boat. It's in a cove, a protected cove. The lake is shimmering. Everything is peaceful. Everything is beautiful. Then halfway through, nature becomes dark. The mountain becomes rocky, craggy, black. And nature becomes something much more intimidating and threatening. And he is able to take the boat back to where he took it from, which is described as a kind of peaceful place, but that doesn't change the fact that now in his mind nature is something much bleaker and much more threatening. Okay, on to context. So context is how is the writer influenced by the period in which he lived, by ideas and thoughts and feelings that were around at the time he lived. Well, Burke's theory of the sublime, we've touched on several times, wasn't necessarily specifically about nature, but here it suits us to kind of apply it to nature. And remember, this is the theory that nature is capable of causing the strongest emotions that human beings can conceive of, can feel. And remember, at this time, Wordsworth in particular was responsible for opening up the wildness of nature to sort of public knowledge. Prior to the Romantics, really, people were suspicious of wild areas such as Scotland or the Lake District or Wales. They were threatening places that they didn't necessarily visit, but the Romantics wanted to kind of explore nature in all its wildness and savagery, and that's part of this theory of the sublime, in order to make them have heightened and more extreme emotions. And that touches on the Romantics as well, doesn't it, really? So the Romantics were interested in nature. Remember, the Romantics are a movement of poets, writers, philosophers and artists. So the Romantics were interested in nature. It was Edward Landseer, I might be having a guess there, but some of the Romantic painters started to paint these wild places that people hadn't necessarily experienced before. So not only were they interested in nature, but they were interested in the more wild and untamed aspects of nature. Because remember, to them, cities and towns were becoming more ordered, more structures. People were being more controlled by politicians and by royalty. So they thought people should experience kind of the wildness of nature in order to contrast with their safer daily existence. And finally, on to structure. I shall have to go back to the poem on this one. So this structure is written in blank verse, specifically unrhymed iambic pentameter. So that means two things. Firstly, blank verse means there's no, let's go back to the poem. Here we go. You get back there. So there's no particular rhyme pattern. If you look, then doesn't rhyme with huge, then doesn't rhyme with instinct. So there's no particular rhyme scheme in this poem, but there is a scheme of meter, which is unrhymed iambic pentameter. So what that means is, if we have a look at these last two lines, and it's the same for all lines except one, there are 10 syllables on each line. So if you're really bored at home, you can count them with me. Put my hand up, look. Like living men moved slowly through the mind. 10 syllables on every line. And just to prove it, on the next line, by day and were a trouble to my dreams. So there's 10 syllables on all lines except one. So it does follow that pattern. The second syllable is stressed. What that means is, if you read it kind of naturally, like living men moved slowly through the mind. So every second syllable lasts a bit longer when you say it and is stressed a bit more than the first, and that's called iambic pentameter. So what does that mean? Well, it means that he kind of has a meter that he sticks to. So there's some structure to the poem, just as there is some structure to his journey. But it's free-flowing. He's not restricted by a rhyme scheme. Just like his journey, there is some purpose to his journey, but he's not restricted. He kind of goes where the river takes him, and there is a sense here that the poem is going where Wordsworth's free-flowing mind is taking him. And the second thing on structure, what was it? Number 2, enjambment. What that means is, if you look at the end of pretty much every line, if these were sentences, they would go on to the next line, wouldn't they? So when from behind that craggy steep till then the horizon's bound. So the punctuation comes in the middle of the line. So every line carries on onto the next line. There is no full stop, or there is no end of a sentence at the end of any line apart from at the end. So every line carries on into the next line, and really what that means is it kind of mirrors his journey. It gives a sense of the continuity of his journey. So each line leads into the next line, just as, if you like, every kind of every time he puts the oars into the lake, then his journey carries on as well. Okay. 3 questions, please, on those. If you want to get your pen and write these down. Number 1, can you tell me, please, what is unrhymed iambic pentameter? Number 2, what is enjambment? And number 3, can you write down, please, an example of personification in the poem? Okay, if you need any help with those, please do email me. Otherwise, over and out for the summer. Have a great summer holiday, and I'll see you when you are big, bad, grown-up Year 11s. Cheerio!